The
expect me
lake
to
had
just
always
sit
been my
back and
sanctuary.
accept this?
Long before
You've
Karen
got another
Cromwell,
thing coming.
the self-proclaimed queen of our homeowners
Get
association,
out of my
started
office!
patrolling the
Get out
neighborhood with a
now!
clipboard
I
and a
don't want
glare
to see you
sharp enough to
again!
cut steel, Clearwater Lake had been my escape. Pop built the cabin here 50 years ago with his own hands. The stones in the fireplace still bore the marks of his hammer. The pine beams still smelled faintly of resin when the summer sun baked through the windows. For me, this wasn't just a cabin. It was heritage. It was home. Karen didn't see it that way. To her, the cabin was an eyesore, a safety hazard, and a non-compliant structure that didn't match her vision of a luxury lakeside community. She'd tried every trick in the book to force me out: bogus fines, threatening letters, even staged safety inspections at dawn. None of it worked, because unlike most of the neighbors, I didn't scare easily. But what Karen didn't know, and what made this particular weekend different, was that I wasn't alone this time. Inside my cabin, seated quietly in Pop's old recliner, was a woman who carried more authority in her briefcase than Karen could ever muster with her HOA gavel. I had invited the state attorney general herself, Patricia Williamson, to meet me here. And we weren't just sipping coffee for fun. We were preparing to dismantle Karen's entire empire. The morning began quietly enough. Mist hung low over the water, curling like smoke as the sun climbed higher. I sat on the porch, sipping black coffee and listening to loons calling across the lake. My nerves buzzed with anticipation. For months I had gathered documents, photos, and recordings, evidence of Karen's fraud, extortion, and witness intimidation. Every sleepless night, every heated confrontation with her, had been leading to this. Inside, Attorney General Williamson flipped patiently through the thick binder I'd assembled. She was calm, deliberate, and nothing like the fire-breathing political dragon I'd imagined. With her sharp eyes and measured voice, she reminded me more of a high school principal who already knew the trouble you'd been up to before you even opened your mouth. "Mr. Henley," she said, tapping a page with her pen, "this is bigger than your HOA. These financial irregularities connect to at least 6 other communities across the state. We're looking at organized fraud on a level most people wouldn't believe." I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. "That's why I called you here. People are scared to speak up. Karen's been running this place like her own fiefdom. Fines, intimidation, threats, it's all part of the same game." The Attorney General gave a thin smile. "And today, she's going to walk straight into her own trap." Almost on cue, I heard it, the roar of Karen's pearl-white Escalade tearing up my gravel driveway like she was leading a high-speed chase. Stones sprayed. Doors slammed. And then came her voice, sharp, commanding, dripping with rage. "Get out here, Henley. You can't hide from me forever." I exchanged a glance with Williamson. She calmly closed the binder, tucking it into her briefcase as though she had all the time in the world. "Shall we?" she said. Karen burst through the door without knocking, heels clicking against the wood floor, phone held high to capture every second for her loyal social media audience. She was streaming live, painting herself as the persecuted victim about to expose corruption. Her followers didn't know they were about to watch her commit multiple felonies in real time. "This is harassment," she shouted, jabbing her manicured finger toward me. "This man is violating HOA codes, and now he's conspiring with state officials to destroy my family. My husband works for the party, and we won't be silenced." I stayed seated, calm as the Attorney General rose slowly from Pop's recliner. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply produced her badge and held it up for the camera to see. "Mrs. Cromwell," she said, in a tone that could have frozen fire. "I am Patricia Williamson, Attorney General of this state. You have just committed breaking and entering, trespassing, and harassment, in my presence." The color drained from Karen's face so fast it was almost comical. Her phone, still live, caught every flicker of shock as thousands of her followers realized they weren't watching a heroic takedown of government corruption. They were watching the unraveling of a criminal. Karen tried to backpedal, words tumbling out like marbles spilling from a broken bag. I have jurisdiction here. This is HOA property. You can't. That's when the door opened again, and Agent Torres stepped inside with 2 FBI officers at her back. Calm, professional, and ready. Mrs. Cromwell, Torres said, her voice steady, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and witness intimidation. And thanks to your live stream, you've also just provided us with video evidence of your intent and your methods. The click of the handcuffs was like music. For the first time in months, I felt my chest loosen. The storm that had hung over our community was breaking at last. Karen's phone clattered to the floor, still streaming as agents led her stumbling toward the waiting car. The comments exploded, some viewers furious at being duped, others gleefully sharing clips of her downfall. I stood slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. Karen, I said, my voice steady, you wanted to kick me out of my cabin. But you just kicked yourself straight into federal prison. The Attorney General gave me a small nod, as if to say well done. Outside, neighbors who'd gathered on the road watched in stunned silence as Karen Cromwell, the woman who'd terrorized us for months, was finally taken away. And this was only the beginning. The news traveled faster than wildfire. By the time Karen's pearl-white Escalade disappeared down the gravel road with FBI lights flashing behind it, half the county already knew she'd been arrested. Not because of law enforcement's press release or because of whispers at the diner, but because Karen herself had broadcast her downfall to thousands. Her live stream, meant to cement her as a martyr for the oppressed homeowner, had instead immortalized her as the villain of her own story. The comments were brutal. Wait, she just broke into a guy's house live on camera? That's the Attorney General she's screaming at. Oh my God. I can't believe I defended this woman. She's insane. Clips of her shrieking about persecution, claiming jurisdiction in my cabin, and trying to wave her HOA badge like a royal seal flooded every corner of social media. Within hours, local news anchors were replaying the footage with that careful tone of disbelief they usually reserve for Florida man stories. By nightfall, national outlets had picked it up. Karen Cromwell, HOA president of Clearwater Lake, became a household name for all the wrong reasons. Inside the cabin, the Attorney General and I sat quietly as the storm raged online. Agent Torres coordinated with her team outside, confirming Karen was secured at the county holding facility. I watched Williamson pour herself another cup of coffee, steady as stone, while my own hands trembled with adrenaline. This, she said, gesturing toward my laptop where the live comments scrolled in real time, is evidence stronger than any affidavit. She gave us everything we needed, and she gave it to us on record. For the first time in months, I exhaled fully. But the fight wasn't over. Not even close. Karen's tentacles had reached deep into our community. She'd ruled by fear, by fines, by manipulating neighbors against one another. Some had benefited from her reign, small favors, waived penalties, selective enforcement. Others had simply kept their heads down, afraid of her wrath. The moment she was cuffed, the entire power structure of the HOA cracked like ice underfoot. That evening, as I walked the familiar gravel path back from Mrs. Patterson's cabin, she'd invited me over to share pie in celebration. I saw small groups of neighbors gathered outside their homes. They whispered in clusters, voices rising with cautious relief. For the first time in years, the lakefront felt lighter. But relief quickly gave way to anger. By the second day, homeowners who'd been fined into near bankruptcy started sharing their stories. Mrs. Henderson revealed Karen had billed her $3,000 for a non-compliant bird feeder. The Carters produced letters threatening demolition of their dock unless they paid thousands in inspection fees. Every folder, every letter, every receipt added weight to the growing pile of evidence. The Attorney General's office set up a temporary unit inside the county courthouse. People lined up outside the doors with boxes of documents, ready to testify. What had once been whispers in living rooms turned into a public reckoning. Still, Karen wasn't going down quietly. Even from her cell, she tried to spin the story. Her husband, Robert Cromwell, a mid-level political treasurer with more ambition than sense, went on local radio to claim his wife had been framed by corrupt officials. He painted her as a patriotic defender of property rights, targeted for her political connections. But the audio clips, the threatening phone calls, and above all the live-streamed invasion of my cabin told a different story. Public opinion shifted quickly. Karen's once loyal online supporters dropped her like a hot coal. Memes appeared overnight, photoshopped images of Karen in handcuffs with captions like HOA gone too far and from gavel to gravel road. By the end of the week, the state froze the HOA's bank accounts. That's when the real rot came spilling out. Tens of thousands of dollars in maintenance funds had been rerouted into shell accounts tied to Karen and Robert. Lavish dinners, spa retreats, even payments toward the Escalade, all disguised as community improvements. Board members who once defended her began tripping over themselves to cut deals, handing over evidence in exchange for lighter charges. Watching the empire she'd built crumble so fast was surreal. For years, Karen had strutted around Clearwater Lake like she was untouchable. She wielded HOA bylaws like a sword, cutting down anyone who resisted. Yet here she was, exposed as nothing more than a common fraudster. One evening, sitting again on Pop's porch, I let myself truly breathe. The lake shimmered under the setting sun, colors rippling gold and crimson across the water. Kids laughed in the distance, their voices no longer hushed by fear of HOA retaliation. For the first time in years, neighbors lingered on docks, chatting openly. Still, the battle wasn't over. Robert was moving quickly, calling in favors, leveraging political contacts, and trying to paint his wife as a victim of a witch hunt. Rumors spread that he was preparing a rally, trying to frame the entire arrest as an attack on family values and community rights. The Attorney General warned me not to get complacent. Desperate people make reckless moves, she said. And Karen, even behind bars, was nothing if not desperate. That warning proved prophetic. Because just when we thought the story was over, Robert's influence, Karen's obsession, and the dark money tied to the HOA fraud network would push the conflict to a dangerous new level. The sun hadn't even risen fully over Clearwater Lake when the first trucks rolled in. I was sipping my morning coffee on the porch when I heard the rumble of engines and the unmistakable sound of voices amplified by megaphones. At first, I thought it was another fishing tournament, the kind where out-of-towners blast country music before dawn. But then I saw the signs. Free Karen. Down with government overreach. Property rights for all. About 24 people gathered on the narrow strip of road outside the HOA office, waving banners and chanting slogans. Leading them, bullhorn in hand, was none other than Robert Cromwell. His face was red with strain, sweat already darkening the collar of his too-tight button-up shirt. "Neighbors," he shouted, voice cracking with desperation. "We will not let corrupt politicians destroy what we built. My wife was defending you when she was unjustly arrested. This is an attack on every single homeowner." The crowd roared, though not as loud as Robert probably hoped. Behind me, the Attorney General's SUV pulled up the gravel path. Williamson stepped out, her sharp eyes narrowing at the commotion. "He's mobilizing her loyalists," she muttered. "Saw it coming." I watched the small protest swell as curious onlookers stopped to gawk. Some shook their heads and walked away. Others, drawn by Robert's bluster, joined in half-heartedly. But it was clear this wasn't the tidal wave of support he wanted. It was more like a ripple in a lake that had already begun to calm. Still, a ripple can turn dangerous if it stirs the wrong waters. By noon, Robert had set up a makeshift stage, a flatbed trailer with cheap speakers blasting patriotic anthems. He painted his wife as a political prisoner, claiming she was locked up for defending the sanctity of homeownership. He conveniently ignored the fact that Karen had broken into my cabin screaming about power while threatening the Attorney General herself. Meanwhile, the real homeowners, the ones Karen had bled dry with fines and intimidation, began fighting back in the court of public opinion. One by one, neighbors took to social media with their own stories. Mrs. Henderson posted a photo of the infamous $3,000 bird feeder fine. The Carters uploaded scans of their dock demolition threats. The Millers shared receipts showing thousands in unexplained fees that had vanished from their HOA dues. Each post went viral, demolishing Robert's narrative in real time. The rally outside the HOA office shrank as quickly as it had formed. By evening, fewer than a dozen people remained, and even they seemed more interested in the free hot dogs Robert had ordered from a local vendor than in shouting slogans. But Robert wasn't done. 2 nights later, just as the lakefront seemed to settle again, a series of late-night phone calls rattled the community. Residents whispered about intimidation. Cars with tinted windows lingered at the edge of driveways. Strange letters, unsigned, typed in all caps, were slipped under doors. Drop your complaint or face consequences. The Attorney General's office tightened security around key witnesses, including me. Agent Torres personally checked the locks on my cabin, insisting I install an additional deadbolt. I tried to shrug it off, but deep down, I knew what this meant. Robert was desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. The breaking point came a week later at the town hall meeting. Clearwater Lake hadn't seen a turnout like this in decades. The room overflowed, neighbors spilling out into the parking lot, craning their necks to hear the proceedings. At the front sat a panel of temporary board members appointed by the state, tasked with stabilizing the HOA until formal elections could be held. Robert stormed in like he owned the place, clutching a thick binder stuffed with papers. His face gleamed with the smugness of a man who thought he still had leverage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, cutting off the chairwoman mid-sentence, "I present evidence of corruption, not from my wife, but from those who seek to destroy her." Gasps rippled through the room. He flipped open the binder, slamming photographs and half-baked charts onto the table. Grainy images of Williamson at public events, random graphs with no labels, and screenshots from obscure conspiracy websites. "This is proof," Robert barked. "Proof that the Attorney General is using my wife as a scapegoat to cover up her own scandals." The room didn't erupt the way he expected. Instead, murmurs of disbelief spread through the crowd. Neighbors leaned toward one another, eyebrows raised, lips curled in disgust. Finally, Mrs. Patterson stood. The sweetest, gentlest woman on the lake, the one who made pies for every community event, raised her voice for the first time anyone could remember. "Robert Cromwell," she said firmly, "you and your wife took thousands from us. You made our lives miserable. You threatened us, fined us, and humiliated us. And now you dare come here with lies and accuse her?" She pointed toward Williamson, who sat silently, her arms crossed. "We're done being afraid of you." The crowd erupted. Not in support of Robert, but in thunderous applause for Mrs. Patterson. Robert's face drained of color. He stammered, tried to shout over the noise, but it was too late. His binder of so-called evidence looked like a prop, his rally like a tantrum. He stormed out of the meeting, slamming the doors so hard they rattled in their frames. That night, he disappeared. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd fled to a cousin's place 2 counties over. Others claimed he was holed up in a motel, plotting his next move. But one thing was clear, his grip on Clearwater Lake was broken. Still, the unease lingered. Because everyone knew the story wasn't finished. Karen might have been behind bars, Robert might have slunk into the shadows, but the damage they'd done, and the enemies they'd made, were far from gone. And as Williamson reminded me when we left the town hall, people like the Cromwells don't vanish quietly. When the dust settles, that's when they're most dangerous. She was right. Because the next chapter of this fight wouldn't be about HOA fines or shady finances. It would be about survival. The first frost of the season glazed the roofs of Clearwater Lake when the news broke. Karen Cromwell was out. Not released, no, her bail had been denied, her trial date set, but somehow, through the kind of maneuvering only a well-connected family could pull, she had been granted a temporary transfer to a medical facility. Health concerns, the papers said. Nobody in the community bought it. Everyone knew it was Robert's doing. For weeks, his whereabouts had been uncertain. Now the pieces clicked into place. He had vanished not because he was defeated, but because he was scheming. And when Karen surfaced again, frail-looking in staged photos outside the hospital, it was clear the Cromwells weren't finished. That weekend, a caravan of black SUVs rolled into town. Reporters. Cameras. Microphones. The kind of media circus Clearwater Lake had never seen. Robert had orchestrated a press conference on the courthouse steps, painting Karen as a victim of political persecution. She stood at his side, pale but defiant, her shocking pink dress standing out against the gray stone. Her voice, though weaker than usual, carried the same venom. "My only crime," she declared, "was protecting homeowners from government tyranny. They locked me up for defending what is ours." Her words echoed across television screens, radio stations, and social feeds. For a moment, it looked like the Cromwells might rewrite the narrative. But the people of Clearwater Lake weren't about to let that happen. The very next day, Williamson called an emergency meeting at the cabin. Around my worn oak table sat neighbors who had once kept quiet out of fear. Now, they were armed with documents, testimonies, and a determination that burned hotter than their anger. "We've given her enough rope," Williamson said flatly. "It's time to show the world what she did with it." The plan was simple but devastating. Every family wronged by Karen would speak out, together. Not in whispers on social media, not in fragmented posts, but in one coordinated surge. Video testimonies were recorded. To pay thousands for unauthorized lawn ornaments, children forbidden to play on their own swings because they were too loud. Within 48 hours, the campaign went live. The truth about Clearwater Lake HOA. It spread like wildfire. The Cromwells' press conference backfired spectacularly. For every claim Karen made about being a victim, a dozen residents posted proof of her bullying, her corruption, her cruelty. National outlets picked up the story, spinning it not as a tale of persecution but as a classic fall from grace, the once powerful HOA tyrant exposed by her own neighbors. Robert panicked. He doubled down, calling another rally on the lakefront. He bussed in supporters from out of town, waving pre-printed signs and chanting slogans. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Instead of fearful silence, Clearwater Lake residents stood across the road with their own signs. "We are not your victims. Karen stole from us. Enough is enough." The two crowds clashed, voices rising into chaos. Police formed a line between them. Cameras rolled. Reporters scribbled furiously. And then, as if the universe itself had timed it, an unmarked van pulled up. Out stepped federal agents. The rally froze. Even the shouting seemed to catch in the crisp autumn air. The lead agent spoke calmly into his megaphone. "Robert Cromwell, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, intimidation of witnesses, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Gasps rippled through both crowds. Robert's face twisted, his hand tightening around the bullhorn. For a moment, it looked like he might resist. But then he saw the cuffs. Saw the agents closing in. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Robert Cromwell went silent. The arrest was swift. The rally collapsed in confusion, supporters scattering like leaves in the wind. Karen, watching from the sidelines, shrieked her protests until an officer gently escorted her back into the SUV. That night, Clearwater Lake was quiet for the first time in months. No rallies, no shouting, no intimidation. Just the soft lap of water against the shore and the steady chirp of crickets in the trees. But inside my cabin, the mood wasn't celebratory. Williamson leaned against the fireplace, her expression heavy. "It's not over," she warned. "The Cromwells will drag this through every court they can. They'll fight until the last dollar's gone." I nodded, staring into the flames. "But the lake has spoken. They've lost their power here." And she agreed. The trial stretched on for months, headlines flaring and fading like sparks. But the outcome was inevitable. With mountains of evidence and a community united against them, the Cromwells crumbled. Their assets were seized. Their HOA charter dissolved. Fines turned into restitution, flowing back to the very people they had wronged. When the verdict was finally read, Clearwater Lake erupted in relief. Neighbors who had once avoided each other out of fear now gathered on porches, sharing food, laughter, and stories of resilience. Children's laughter returned to the docks, swing sets squeaked again in backyards, and for the first time in years, the community felt like a home. As for me, I still sit on the same porch with my coffee, watching the water glimmer in the morning light. Sometimes, I think back to the day Karen stormed into my cabin, screaming about power, and I marvel at how close we came to letting fear rule us. But fear only holds power until people choose to stand. And when Clearwater Lake finally stood together, Karen and Robert Cromwell fell harder than anyone could have imagined. The HOA tyrants were gone. The lake was free. And the lesson lingered: no matter how loud the bullies shout, they can't drown out the truth forever.